Everyone, welcome back to the show. My name is Dan Hafner. I have another special guest on here. I'm going to bring in a second, but today we're going to talk a little bit about scaling up. This is always kind of the big bad ugly wolf, or maybe even like a sexy topic for some people. Like, how do we scale up? How do we grow? How do we? It's kind of that ominous thing some of us are chasing. Like, how do I scale? And a lot of people want to scale too fast or too soon. Some people have no problem with it. Some people really struggle with it. So we're going to talk with an expert today, Vijay Rangan of Vijay Rangan Consulting, who I'm going to bring in here in a second. He's an expert in this. Started going on this podcast tour talking about these things, and I had to have him on to talk about these things. So I'm going to bring him here in a second. But before I do, as always, I really appreciate if you guys can like, subscribe, follow the show, recommend the show, leave any kind of rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're getting this show. It really, really helps. And I really appreciate you guys. The show's starting to grow a lot more. So just keep sharing, keep rating, keep liking, whatever you're doing. It's really helping. And then maybe it's just the fact that we're just bringing you some freaking awesome content. Maybe that's part of it too. So either way, that's my little spiel for that. So we're going to call him Jay. He goes by Jay. So Jay, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey Dan, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, before we get into the questions, give us a little bit more background on yourself, kind of where you came from. I know you've worked with some big clients in the past for some big companies, so just give us a little bit of what you got going on.
Yeah, for sure. So like you said, I've worked at a few big companies, Postman, ThoughtWorks, Gojek, and most recently NuBank, a little over a year ago. And I've been a senior lead engineer at all those companies, working to create products for like the millions of users. And so I feel like I have a pretty good experience for where I am right now. And in fact, that's why I started the company was I really have a passion for entrepreneurship. I just needed to do something by myself. And I love tech, I love code, I love software. So kind of merge those two worlds. And I'm taking all the experience from building these products for all these big tech companies and then kind of democratizing that for startups around the world.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that word up because that was one of the questions I had for you. So you say that you want to democratize big tech engineering practices. You want to democratize big tech engineering practices. So what does that mean? Explain that to us.
I feel like a lot of knowledge from where I'm standing, a lot of knowledge sits in people's heads. So a lot of startups who are either starting out, so they may be 5, 10%, 15% companies that maybe recently got funding, have maybe hit product market fit. So they're in that sweet spot where they are able to generate revenue, but they don't know what it takes to go to the next level. So when you design for a few hundred or a few thousand or even tens of thousands of people, it's very different from building something that is of top-notch quality for wanting to take that to the millions or even the hundreds
Mm.
of thousands. And so I feel like the knowledge of big tech expertise tends to be with big tech companies. The reason is that those companies have very deep pockets and they can afford to both train and hire engineers, top-notch talent from across the world, thereby kind of, again, siloing that knowledge within these large tech companies. And I'd like to spread that knowledge that I've seen developed and trained in these companies to startups. So I
Mm.
consult with them. That's what I mean by democratize.
Gotcha. Well, and the other thing too that makes the difference between like a big tech firm or a little tech startup or whatever it might be, not only what you said was deep pockets where they can just throw all kinds of money, they have giant marketing budgets, whatever, advertising budgets, um, but they probably tend to have more systems, more documentation, more processes in place. Is that also kind of an edge that they have as well too?
That is. In fact, when I say big tech engineering practices, I don't mean just the engineering side of things, in that I don't mean they're purely technical. I think there are these communication like things that we can do. Documentation, for example, like you mentioned, the way you do project management, the way you do stakeholder management, the way you plan out your MVPs, product cycles, etc. There's a certain kind of method to the madness, if I may, that big tech companies follow that kind of works. And along with the engineering kind of expertise that I've seen, I'm also kind of applying those principles that I've seen work at these large companies. So in a sense, it's people management, right? It's process management, and it's also engineering practices.
Okay. Okay. So if I got it right, you can basically help either, someone like me maybe, or someone out there that has kind of their own small. So if I just had like an idea for a startup and I'm like, hey, like this would be really, really cool. Is that something you can help with, or do you kind of come in more to established type of businesses who have a product, looking to scale, or those types of things? I just want to kind of classify where you definitely succeed most.
I think it that hinges on the definition of success. But yes, of course, I could
Right.
help you if you had a small team of maybe 5, 10 engineers. I
Okay.
could help you, but the the the, the mechanics of how I would help you would be very different. So with a more established company, I would likely be more hands-on. There's like a range of how I help companies. It's either really hands-on, be working with their teams many hours in a week, and it can be kind of hands off where I'm more advisory and I can just help with certain technical decisions or navigate processes, put in best practices. So that's a long answer or a long-winded way of saying yes, I can help companies like yours. If you had a company, you had an idea saying, I have this idea, how do I start? I would be someone who can come in as an advisory capacity. But if you were a company that already had an engineering team, then I would probably come in that spectrum of hands-on versus hands-off to say, how would you like to engage? Do you want me to be full on like an architect, a CTO style engagement, or do you want me to be more advisory? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's tailored based on what you are, right? Exactly, or what stage you're in. So, okay, that makes sense. So do you have like a cool or interesting case study that you might be able to share? And kind of where I want to go with this is, I kind of want to, is there certain principles that you see in people that you've worked with, or companies that you've worked with that have been able to execute maybe certain principles that like you said, it's very different of having a product for a few hundred people versus a few million people. Very, very, very different type of approach. So do you have any kind of like I said, like a case study of some, a company or a product that you've been able to work with, and they've scaled up, or they've tweaked in certain ways, or were there certain principles they applied or you taught, or anything like that at all?
For them to go from where they are to like scaling up, is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
correct. Yes.
Yeah, there was this really interesting project in Malaysia with a client of mine. I think I don't engage with them currently, but they're a fintech company in Malaysia where they had an engineering team and they really needed to scale up quickly in getting their fintech product off the ground. And so the principles that I use there, it's a pretty interesting one. The principles that I use there were not really typically what startups do. So let me explain what typically startups do. They have a few engineers on their team. So they take a programming language or a stack like Node.js or JavaScript. And they say, okay, we're going to build our services using Docker and put it on Kubernetes and put it on AWS. They'll do all of these things. But with this company, we chose because of the time frame, and that can take a while because you need to build out these processes, you need to build out continuous delivery, or you need to build out systems where you can move quickly. So you have a product MVP in mind, you want to like quickly iterate on it, develop the code, um, uh, share the responsibility amongst engineers, and then have those engineers kind of push code and just keep experimenting. But so doing it the typical way takes time. Whereas with this one, we kind of went a completely serverless approach. So we actually completely relied on AWS's serverless kind of offerings. So we went with Lambda functions, DynamoDB, step functions, and a few other very little maintenance in terms of process. And then we were very quickly able to kind of scale processes. So it was built, the architecture, I can't go too much into details, obviously, but
Yeah.
the architecture was such that you could switch these components up fairly easily and iterate very quickly. Because there were already conventions baked into AWS. So we leveraged all of that stuff to, I think from month 0 to like month 4, we had a fully functioning MVP running. where they could show it to like customers. And yeah, it was good. And this was like mobile web backend database, everything. That
Okay.
was good.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Now you mentioned something I think I believe is on one of your profiles, or it might be even on your site. I think it's on your site. Sorry, vijayrangan.com. We'll put the link for it in the show notes here. But you mentioned that you help startups and scale ups. Now, I've never heard the term scale ups before, but I think we all kind of know like what a startup is. I guess maybe there's some loose definitions of these things. But how do you define a scale up? What is a scale up company?
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I don't think there's actual definitions for these things, but I use that terminology very purposefully because the way I see it, to distinguish between two types of companies in this range is startups are typically, like I said before, are the ones that maybe have a few engineers, maybe have 5, 10 engineers perhaps, but it's not really about the engineering team. It's about the stage at which the company is. So a startup could be someone that is either yet to find product market fit. So they have maybe a handful of customers that they're still kind of iterating with, figuring out their niche. They have some revenue coming in, but they're still finding their product market fit. Whereas a scale up is one that's a little more mature. They're more further down the product phase. And so they're at the point where they've already found product market fit. They've locked in their marketing. They've locked in their sales pipelines. They kind of have a steady stream of customers that they can talk to and bring in. They already have existing customers that are there because they found product market fit. They're paying them pretty well. They're a company that is at least in the 50 to 200 to 250 range, which means they have enough revenue to support that kind of full-time employees. And so that ties in kind of to your customer base. All right. So at this point, then, if you are doing this kind of revenue, and there are nuances in this, it could be how much you're charging, do you only serve enterprises, et cetera, et cetera. But a scale-up would be one of those companies that you are at a point where you really need to now put in those solid foundations to say, okay, from now on, I'm potentially an enterprise scale product. I need to have a really solid foundation upon which I can build. I need to have a set of processes that are repeatable, that help maintain this foundation. I have a set of processes that I can put in place so that I can onboard new engineers, so that I can set in the right mental models for my existing engineers, so that I can set in best practices for maybe even changing the current architecture. So it could be a whole number of things. But in my mind, there's a distinction between a startup who are still finding product market fit and a scale up who's found it and is now scaling to the next level.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like there's probably not a hard, fast line of saying, okay, you have this much revenue, you have this many team members, you have this many whatever. It's probably a very, very big gray area. But I see what you're talking about. It almost kind of seems like a startup is kind of like that. It's almost like I picture somebody like grasping it. You're just kind of like, okay, we have this idea, and we're gonna throw something out there against the wall and see if it sticks. And they're still kind of figuring it out, finding your way in the dark, right? Like I said, the power went out, at my house yesterday, and we're just kind of like feeling our way around in the dark to kind of find the flashlight, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
that's kind of what you become, right? It's kind of like you become that flashlight to have someone like, oh yeah, here's where I need to go, or here's the stairs to go upstairs, right?
That's a nice analogy. I like that. But yeah, at the startup phase, you can be really scrappy. It doesn't really matter. You don't need to follow agile, for example. You don't need to follow sprints. You don't need to
Yeah.
have a really solid tech stack that you can build off of. You should, but you don't have to. You can still get away with a lot of stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I've been there myself where I came from that world of a development shop that was I mean, I think we had 7 or 8 projects, but we only had a team of like 9 or 10 people. And I was even QA. I wasn't a developer. So I was just the tester trying to break stuff, right? That's how I always got I always said like I can make fun of developers because I used to work with them all the time. They were a completely different breed of people. But we completely lost where I was going with that. Oh, so like we we kind of got to this point where I came from that world. So I was like, I was going to take those practices with me. And I was like, okay, when I go and develop things, when I start projects with things, I'm going to have Jira and I'm going to have this documentation piece. I'm going to have like sprints. I'm going to do all this stuff. And that got to be way too much for just a one man shop like me. Right. Like at the beginning. And I was like, okay, that is not what I need to be doing, and I adapted. I learned like, okay, I could probably use something like maybe like a Trello or, a task. I just need some kind of task list thing. Maybe I can get by a Google Sheets checklist of like, boom, 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 boom. We got this done. Okay, great. Off we go.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't need to have these big, giant, awesome software tools. Just like you said, like regular, I got used to the regular sprint meetings. I still have some, we still have some bigger clients that we do that with, but it's only when they warrant it, right? It's like they have,
Exactly.
processes in place and people that need to be like, okay, but if you're just like a one person show of like a startup, like you said, you don't, it becomes like, I never understood when I was working with developers and doing this inside of the QA world. And they would I could see they were so irritated when I would come to them and be like, hey, I have this issue. I have this. It's not in the documentation. It's not in the documentation. It doesn't exist. And I see why they're like, dude, like, yeah, I get it. I'll document it. And like, it was like, it's such a bane of their existence because documentation becomes like this giant overhead. It's like paperwork that
Yeah.
it just is like, it just doesn't serve. As a developer, you feel like this doesn't serve my purposes. I need to be building stuff. I need to be doing stuff, solving problems. I don't need to be documenting it. What are you talking about? You know? So yeah,
But that actually, that's interesting that you say that, because that also changes depending on the scale of the company. Um, if you have a lot of engineers, or even if you have a lot of stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean like product managers, engineering heads, leads, other developers, and perhaps a CTO, head of architecture, I don't know. With all of these functions comes even more of a need to have great documentation. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, in startups, you can be fine. You can just put everything in a Notion or in Slack, for example. You can just refer back to Slack. It can work, but uh, and it's really nice that it can, because you want to be nimble, you want to be fast, you just want to keep moving and iterating and building, like you said. But with larger tech companies, it breaks down very quickly.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I got an idea how we can wrap the show up here. I mean, we're not wrapping up anytime soon, but you have this, like we mentioned your site, vijayrangan.com. We'll have in the show notes here. And you have this really cool tool. Like, so how do we know, like we said, like there's a huge gray area between a startup and a scale up. And you actually have a really cool assessment tool that you can kind of go through on that site. If you scroll to the bottom, I'm actually going to share my screen with you guys. So if you guys are listening to this, I'll try to walk you through it. Um, but if you are watching this on like YouTube or even on Spotify, we have it now. You'll be able to see what I'm doing over here. So can you see this, Jay?
Yes.
This is your site, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah, help startups and scale ups. We just kind of helped, define that for lack of a better term. But what we did is if you scroll down here, it says discover your engineering score, take the assessment, right? So before we actually jumped on, I was kind of curious. I was like, this is interesting. Let me walk through this. So I actually clicked through, took the assessment. Like you said, it's like a few questions. I think it goes to, 13 questions, a
Yep.
couple of minutes, completely free, and you get these instant results, right? So I did take this, and let's walk through it. So I got a overall score of 64%, um, which we'll figure out what that means. I'm not really sure if that's good or bad. I mean, it sounds like not a very good passing grade, but we'll see. Um, so basically, this has three pieces, right? It has software development life cycle. So you have a score for that. You have a tech stack score, and you have a software architecture score, right? So my software development lifecycle score was 55%, which says medium. So your current software development life cycle score indicates that you have a solid foundation, but there are opportunities to make your processes even more effective. Ensure that your development lifecycle is consistently followed and includes comprehensive testing and quality assurance stages, regularly updating and refining your SDLC, processes can help align them better with your business objectives, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So this score right here, 55%, what would you say to this?
That's not bad, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think in my view, anything above an 80% is really good. You have 70 plus in other places, which means you're doing pretty well on your tech stack, actually. But if you really want to fine tune this and get even better, I would push that to maybe getting something above 80 to 85%. 55% is like the label says, it's medium. I think there's a lot of room for improvement here.
Okay. So yeah, that's definitely the lowest one that I got personally. So the next one, like you said, was tech stack. So your current tech stack, I got a 71%, which is again a medium. Your current tech stack shows scores that you are on the right track, but there's still room for improvement. While your technology choices are adequate, optimizing and updating certain components can further enhance your development efficiency and system performance. Regularly review and adapt your tech stack to keep pace with industry advancements and modern development practices. By doing so, you can ensure your applications are robust and scalable. So I'm almost there. I'm almost there with the tech stack, right? You said, you said 80 to 85 would be high. So that's definitely good. And then the highest one that we got was software architecture, which was 74%. So that suggests that your system is reasonably stable and scalable, but there are areas that can be optimized. So focusing on improving modularity and flexibility of your architecture to better handle future growth and changes. Strengthening your architecture will lead to a more robust and maintainable system capable of meeting evolving demands. So, okay, so that's great. I just wanted to show that. So basically, you break these down into your three areas: how you manage the life cycle of your software, what your actual tech stack that you're building things on, and then how's that different from the architecture? That's more of how that can be. Like, is that more back end things? How do you differentiate those two?
It kind of really depends. A tech stack is really the entire stack. If you're an API company, you would be mostly backend. So you could say all of my backends, all of them. Let's say I have the microservices and services comes into architecture, but the tech stack itself would be your choice of language, framework, database, caches, perhaps. Your cloud hosting would be one of them. Also, would fall into your tech stack. What kind of database you're choosing? What if you're doing caching, if at all? Are you using queues? If so, what kind of queues are you using? So that would be a tech stack assessment. Software architecture would be stuff like have you built a monolith? Have you built a microservice? Are you running all of your services via Lambdas, or do you have containers running? Are you using queues? Like it kind of ties into your tech stack, but are you using queues is a good question. Is your architecture event driven, or is it purely synchronous in the sense request response driven? Are you doing event sourcing? These are software architecture decisions. So
Okay. Interesting.
while those are a lot of questions and I can't include all of them in an assessment, people would get bored. And so I limited the number of questions to get a high level view of how people are doing.
Yeah, no, it's super easy. It's super fast. Like I said, I literally did it right before we jumped on here, about 10 minutes before, because I was kind of looking through some things. I saw this. I was like, oh, this is interesting. So yeah, go check it out at his site. It's vijayrangan.com. It's VijayRangan.com. I'll have it in all the notes and everything for you guys. But it's at the bottom of the page. And if you're in that position where you're thinking about scaling up, or you are kind of wondering like where you sit, this was actually very insightful for me. I kind of see why my software development lifecycle is lower, because I remember answering like, do you use Agile? And I said no, because I don't use it anymore. Right. So that's obviously going to make, so that makes sense. But no, that's very insightful, and actually kind of makes me feel a little bit better about where kind of all the pieces are of things like that.
Yeah.
So to give it a number is very interesting. Because like you said, it's kind of back to what you said at the beginning. You kind of have a lot of things in your head. Am I doing this right? Should I be doing more? Should I be doing something different? But then you like actually quantify something, and you're like, oh, okay, well, like, yeah, I'm not doing too bad. I thought I was going to be at like a 40 and I'm at a 70. So like, oh crap. Like,
Exactly. Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's interesting. I mean, this quantifying of anything is just so much fun. Like with a client of mine, like I spearheaded this initiative of getting telemetry data out of all of their infrastructure and their apps, which is like putting metrics up about their request response, putting traces and all that stuff. So when we saw the latency numbers, it wasn't actually that bad, but there wasn't a way to do this before. And so they actually felt kind of happy looking at the numbers that came out of that exercise. So that was good.
I'm reminded of my head football coach in college. He would always say when we would play in the football game and then we'd go back and watch tape. He would always say it's never as good as you think, and it's never as bad as you think. You think you had like this one awesome play, and you're like, okay, like you did good, but like you weren't like Superman, And then you think, oh my God, I screwed this play up so bad. It's so terrible. I hate like. And then you look and you're like, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, So it kind of all shakes out like that. So I think sometimes, I'm
Yeah.
he was an awesome guy. Coach Matlack, shout out to you. Awesome. All right, Jay. Do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. No, this was very helpful. We really appreciate you coming on. So yeah, just go check out his site. If you're in kind of the market for additional help, or I mean even just the assessment to take, you guys, like I said, it's completely free. I took it really helped kind of give me some clarity around some things, so go check that out for sure. And yeah, well, thank you for having on thank you for coming on, Jay. Really appreciate you, man.
Of course, I really appreciate you having me.
All right, guys. All right, so that's a wrap for this episode. Really appreciate all of you continuing to listen. As always, please like, rate, and subscribe the show. That is super, super helpful, and you guys are doing a great job at that. Really, really appreciate it. And that is it for this show. Go check out Jay's site, take the assessment, and we'll see y'all guys next time. Bye.
Would you like to include the social